Imagine being trapped in solid ice for 10 months. Your shit buried in snow, the sun gone for weeks, and your only food, raw meat from seals, birds, and polar bears. This was the reality faced by Willem Barents and his crew during one of the earliest attempts to survive the Arctic. In 1596, Dutch explorer Willem Barents set sail searching for a northern sea route to Asia. His journey was bold, driven by the promise of trade, prestige, and discovery. But as they pushed further into the unknown, the Arctic began to show its true nature. Summer faded fast, and with it, their last chance to escape the coming ice. In August, the ship was suddenly caught by the crushing grit of the polar winter. Frozen solid near the barren shores of Novaya Zemlya, they watched helplessly as sheets of ice formed around their vessel. The pressure grew. The wooden hull groaned under the weight. Masts, sails, and deck were soon buried under thick layers of snow and frost. The ship became immobile, heavy, unstable, and unsafe. To slow the freezing, the crew worked around the clock. They broke ice with axes, hammers, and even their frozen hands. But it never stopped. Each night, the cold returned stronger. They faced a choice: stay and fight to survive, or leave and die at sea. They chose to stay. Desperate, they tore apart their own ship, using every plank, rope, and canvas to build a shelter on the frozen land. From that wreck, a small cabin emerged, simple, but strong enough to face the brutal winter ahead. There, in that wooden box lost in the endless white, Barents and his men faced one of the coldest winters ever recorded by explorers. Outside, the cold was merciless. Winds cut through layers of clothing like knives. The sun vanished for weeks, a long, frozen night without end. Inside the hut, things weren't better. There was no firewood, nothing to burn, no warmth. Their solution? Seal fat. Sticky, smelly, and thick, but vital. They used it for fire. They ate it. It kept them alive. The smell filled their clothes, their skin, the wooden walls, but it was life. Every ounce of fat became gold in the Arctic. Then came the polar bears, drawn by the scent of burning fat and meat. With crude weapons and cold hands, the crew defended their shelter. The bears were hunted, their meat shared carefully. Nothing was wasted. Fur became insulation. Bones turned into tools. Meat kept them from starving. To drink, they melted snow, slowly, in small pots. Heated rocks were wrapped in cloth and held to numb fingers and feet to fight frostbite. Every day was the same. Eat, stay warm, stay sane. Every action was a fight against the silence of death. There was no space for weakness. Forced to live in a cramped shelter, the men were pushed to the edge of their physical and mental endurance. And yet, they held on. In the Arctic, survival wasn't heroic. It was a chain of small victories, one bitter day at a time. Each day endured brought a flicker of hope that one day the sun would return. But food quickly became a struggle. The freezing cold preserved meat, but made it nearly impossible to cook. Seabirds, caught near their makeshift home, were often eaten raw or barely thawed. Too frozen to cut, as hard as stone, more like icy feathered bricks than food. But they were swallowed anyway. There was no other choice. Seals were hunted when possible. Their meat and fat kept bodies moving and makeshift stoves burning. Their skins were stitched into crude insulation, plugging the cracks that let the cold wind creep in. Every animal caught meant another few days of life, but something far more dangerous was creeping in, silent and unseen: scurvy. The lack of vitamin C spread through the crew like a slow, inevitable curse. Bleeding gums, weakness, pain. In desperation, they boiled fresh animal organs, hoping to pull out some hidden nutrient. But it was already too late for many. And then came a new danger, hidden inside the food they relied on. One man nearly died after eating polar bear liver. It seemed like nourishment, but it was packed with toxic levels of vitamin A, hallucinations, burning fever, nausea that felt like poison. In this world, the line between food and death was razor thin and often invisible. Each bite was a gamble. Eat to avoid starvation and pray it wouldn't be your last meal. But the cold wasn't their only enemy. Darkness settled over everything. When the sun vanished completely, time itself seemed to disappear. There were no days, no nights, just one long, endless black. A single oil lamp flickering was all that reminded them they still existed. The darkness began to crawl inside their minds. Some saw shapes moving across the walls. Others heard voices no one else could. A few fell into silence, giving up the will to fight. The border between reason and madness blurred. Keeping the mind alive was as important as keeping the body warm. They found ways to stay sane. They sang old Dutch hymns in unison, quiet voices pushing back against the silence. One crewman, Gerrit de Veer, kept a journal. He wrote about the cold, the sickness, the slow decay of hope. His words became their link to a world beyond the ice. Writing was more than memory. It was resistance. Proof they had not vanished. They even made games from animal bones. Primitive dice, simple tokens, just enough to distract themselves. They didn't laugh often, but when they did, it reminded them they were still men, not just survivors. The shelter was barely big enough to hold them. Grown men slept side by side, wrapped in skins, cloth scraps, and pieces of sail. Not for comfort, but for heat. Body warmth was their only defense against the endless night. In that frozen box of wood, ice, and silence, preserving sanity was a group effort, and day by day, they fought to keep hold of the last thing they truly owned, their minds. By June 1597, after over 8 months locked in ice, something changed. The white horizon began to break. Tiny rivers cracked through the frozen crust. The ice groaned, split, moved. The Arctic had decided to release them. But their ship was no longer seaworthy. Its hull had been crushed by the winter. Its timbers cracked, its frame destroyed. If they wanted to escape, they had to build something new from what had once carried them. So they did. Using broken pieces of the wreck, they built 2 small boats. They were weak, unstable, but they meant freedom. On the day they left, they looked back at the cabin that had saved them. Empty, quiet. A witness to something almost impossible. But not all would leave. Willem Barents, the expedition's leader, was too weak to continue. Scurvy and starvation had broken his body. He died during the journey home, never seeing his homeland again. But his name lives on, carved into the map, Barents Sea, a frozen tribute to the man who dared to face the ice. The survivors changed forever, pushed on. They navigated broken waters until one day Dutch merchant ships spotted them. There were only a few left, but they were alive. They had conquered cold, darkness, and death itself. They returned as shadows of a frozen odyssey. Their journey was the first European expedition to survive a full Arctic winter, and it changed everything. They proved that bravery wasn't enough, that nature couldn't be tamed by flags and swords. Only through knowledge, preparation, and respect for the unknown could men hope to survive. The sea that tried to bury them now carries Barents's name. They didn't find a new trade route. They didn't reach Asia. But they earned something greater: the right to be remembered not as explorers, but as survivors. While many vanished into the ice without a trace, Barents's crew left behind a message. With courage, wit, and seal fat, even the impossible can be endured. If you enjoy diving into the gritty realities of life at sea, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss another journey into the past. There's a whole world of forgotten stories waiting to be uncovered, right here